I'm Tessa Matthews, 29 years old, and I just got publicly humiliated and called a pathetic freeloader by my own mother in front of 60 wealthy guests at her extravagant anniversary gala. My vicious stepfather violently shoved my beautifully wrapped box right back into my chest and roared, "We do not need your cheap, pathetic gift. Take your garbage and get out." I didn't flinch. I didn't shed a single tear. I just laughed softly, untied the gold ribbon, and showed the entire silent ballroom exactly what they had just thrown away. Since that spectacular fallout, my phone screen hasn't stopped lighting up with their desperate calls and frantic apologies, but I have finally learned the most freeing lesson of my life. Not every single call actually deserves an answer. Before I tell you the whole story, if you think it's worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And if you don't mind, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. To understand why I stood in that grand room holding that green box, I have to take you back 14 years. Back to the exact second my entire world shattered. I was 15. My father, Daniel Matthews, was my hero. He was a construction engineer with rough hands and the warmest smile. We weren't wealthy, but he made us feel like we had everything. He was the kind of dad who worked double shifts just so we could smell the ocean on a weekend trip, the kind of man who never missed a school play, who remembered the tiny moments everyone else forgot. That Thursday morning, the air in our house felt normal, safe. He kissed my forehead, his jacket smelling faintly of coffee and sawdust. "When I get back, we'll go look at that college campus you've been eyeing," he promised, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Start thinking about your future, sweetheart." He never came back. Thursday was a kiss on the forehead. Friday was a closed casket. The police claimed he fell asleep at the wheel. Quick, painless. A gentle lie they hand to broken families so we don't picture the terror in those final seconds. At the funeral, the air was heavy with the suffocating scent of lilies. I watched my mother Laura standing by the grave accepting condolences with practiced, perfect grace. I waited for her to crack. I wanted us to hold each other, to scream until our throats bled, to mourn the anchor of our lives. But when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see a grieving widow. I saw sharp, cold calculation. "Where are your tears, Mom?" Exactly 2 weeks later, she packed his entire existence into brown cardboard boxes. His favorite books, his worn tools, even the silver watch his own father had given him. Taped shut, banished. She didn't ask if I wanted to keep a single memory. Not one thing. I learned the horrific truth one evening from the shadows of the hallway. I heard her whispering on the phone, a sick flutter of excitement in her voice. "The insurance money cleared," she murmured. "I can finally start over. Start over. Like my dad, like me, like our whole life together was just a rough draft she was eager to crumple and throw away." What I didn't know then, the secret that would haunt me for years, was that she had already met someone else. Robert Townsend. They had been seeing each other for 8 months before my dad's car ever went off that road. My father wasn't even cold in the ground, and my mother was already plotting her escape. 20 months after the funeral, I was dragging a single suitcase into a stranger's house in suburban Connecticut. My mother had married Robert in a quick courthouse ceremony I wasn't even invited to. Just a formality, she waved it off. Robert's house was a massive, spotless colonial with a manicured lawn. His son Dylan, who was 21, lived in a giant guest room with an attached bath. And me, I was shoved into a converted storage closet with one tiny window. For 3 years I lived as a ghost. I stopped breathing too loudly. I walked on eggshells, shrinking myself to fit into their shiny, wealthy little picture. Dylan drove a brand new Audi, a graduation gift from his dad, heading off to an elite university with every bill paid. I was ripped from my friends, forced to start over at a new high school. When it was finally time for my college applications, I cornered my mother in the kitchen. My hands were shaking. "Mom, I got a partial scholarship," I pleaded quietly. "But I still need about $10,000 a year. Could you?" She cut me off, her face hardening like stone. "Tessa, your father's insurance money is for rebuilding this family. Dylan needs support for studying abroad. Besides, you're almost 18. You should learn to stand on your own feet." Robert, who had been pretending to read his newspaper, peeked over the edge. His eyes were flat and cruel. "This house doesn't support freeloaders," he spat with a thin smile. "Want a degree? Earn it. That's the real world." I stood frozen. I looked at my mother, watching her nod in agreement with this man who was casually throwing me out. The truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience, trash left over from a life she desperately wanted to erase. They thought they had broken me right then and there. They thought I was just going to fade away. but they had absolutely no idea what was waiting for me in the dark, and how it was about to change every single rule of their game. The night before my high school graduation, I lay wide awake in my tiny, closet-sized bedroom. The air felt thick, making it hard to breathe. I stared at the peeling paint on the water-stained ceiling and did the brutal math in my head. 0 savings, 0 family support, a partial college scholarship that still left a crushing $10,000 gap every single year. And worst of all, a ticking clock. Robert had made his cruel deadline perfectly clear. The very day I turned 18, I was expected to pack my bags and get out of his house. That was exactly 4 weeks away. 4 weeks until I'm completely homeless. I had truly tried everything. I worked exhausting part-time shifts at the mall until my feet blistered. I stayed up late tutoring younger kids for pocket change. I even swallowed my pride and begged my mother for just one real conversation about my future. Every single attempt was met with cold silence or the exact same robotic speech. "We have responsibilities to this family, Tessa," she would say, not even looking up from her coffee. "Dylan's education is expensive. You need to learn independence." Independence. What a toxic way to dress up abandonment. They acted like throwing me to the wolves was some kind of noble parenting strategy. Lying there in the dark, the heavy blanket of despair pressed down on my chest. If I gave up right now, I would become exactly what they wanted me to be: a failure, a hopeless burden, a girl who simply couldn't survive on her own. But how could I fight back when my hands were completely empty? Suddenly, the harsh buzz of my phone shattered the quiet. I jumped. The glowing screen showed an unknown number with a Philadelphia area code. My thumb hovered over the ignore button. It was probably just spam or a wrong dial late at night, yet a weird knot formed in my stomach. Something urged me to answer. I swiped the green icon and held the phone to my ear. "Hello? Tessa?" a woman's voice asked. It sounded warm yet deeply cautious. "This is Pamela, your Aunt Pam, Daniel's sister." My heart slammed against my ribs. Aunt Pamela. I hadn't seen or heard a single word from her since the gloomy afternoon of my father's funeral. My mother had ruthlessly cut off all contact with Dad's side of the family the second she slid Robert's ring onto her finger. "I know your mom doesn't want us talking," Pamela continued, her tone dropping to a serious whisper. "But there is something incredibly important I need to tell you, something your father left behind. For you." My blood ran cold. Dad left something for me? That weekend I lied. I told my mother I was sleeping over at a classmate's house to study for final exams. She barely nodded, not caring enough to ask for details. Instead of studying, I bought a cheap ticket and rode a rattling train for 5 hours straight to Philadelphia. When the doors hissed open, Aunt Pamela was waiting on the crowded platform. Catching sight of her knocked the breath right out of my lungs. She looked so intensely like my dad. She had his kind, crinkling eyes and the exact same gentle way of tilting her head. The striking resemblance hit me like a physical wave. I almost broke down crying right there among the rushing commuters. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, pulling me into a fierce, tight hug. I know this wasn't an easy trip to make. Her apartment was small, smelling faintly of cinnamon and old paper. It felt like a real home. One entire wall was covered in framed photographs of my dad as a young man. Happy, smiling images I had never been allowed to see. Beautiful memories my mother had actively erased from our lives. We sat across from each other at a scratched kitchen table. Pamela reached out and covered my trembling hands with hers. "Your mother and I never got along," she admitted softly, sadness edging her words. "But I am not telling you this to be spiteful. I am telling you because Daniel made me swear a promise." She explained that shortly after marrying Laura, my father started to worry. He loved my mom deeply, despite her obvious flaws, but a dark fear crept into his mind about what would happen to his little girl if disaster ever struck. "Your dad didn't trust Laura with money," Pamela said carefully, watching my reaction. "He saw how she blindly spent cash, how she prioritized shiny things over real security. He was terrified that if he passed away unexpectedly, you would be left completely stranded. So he planned ahead." I blinked, my mind spinning. Planned ahead? How could a man who worked construction plan ahead for this kind of nightmare? Pamela slowly stood up and walked down the narrow hallway to a dark closet. A minute later, she returned carrying a small, heavy wooden box secured with brass hinges. She set it gently on the table between us like it was fragile glass. "Your father handed this to me 6 years ago," she whispered. "He made me swear on my life to keep it hidden, and to give it to you only when you truly needed it." She tapped the top of the smooth wood. "I think, sweetheart, that time is right now." My fingers brushed the cool brass latch, my pulse roaring in my ears like a freight train. completely unaware that opening this tiny box was about to blow my mother's perfect, wicked little world right off its hinges. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The tiny brass hinges let out a soft groan as I pushed the heavy lid back. Inside the box, resting on a bed of faded crimson velvet, was a thick stack of official legal papers. The name printed boldly across the very top page was mine, Tessa Marie Matthews. Your father didn't just open a simple savings account that your mother could easily drain, Pamela explained, her voice cracking with thick emotion. He had a brilliant lawyer friend help him set up a watertight, irrevocable trust fund. Every single month, no matter how desperately tight their grocery budget got, my dad had quietly slipped money away. $30 here, $60 there. Sometimes a few hundred if he broke his back working exhausting weekend overtime shifts. He specifically named me as the sole trustee. He made absolutely sure Laura couldn't legally touch a single solitary penny if he died. I flipped with numb fingers to the final portfolio entry. $52,000. The small kitchen instantly blurred. I couldn't pull air into my lungs. $52,000. It was a golden ticket out of my waking nightmare. But as I lifted my tear-filled eyes to thank her, my gaze caught something horrifying sitting on her crowded kitchen counter. A towering stack of past-due medical bills, crowned by a bright red final foreclosure warning. My soaring heart violently plummeted. She was drowning in massive debt, actively losing her home, yet she was calmly handing me a life raft. Aunt Pam, no, you have to take it, I begged, frantically shoving the heavy legal documents back across the scratched table. Please, pay your medical bills. Save your beautiful apartment. I can't do this. She didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She pushed the papers right back toward my chest, her dark eyes fiercely bright with unshed tears. Never. I will never touch it. This is your father's final dream, Tessa. I will gladly sleep on the freezing streets before I let his ultimate sacrifice for you be sacrificed for me. He never breathed a word to your mother, Pamela continued softly, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. He was terrified she would invent a selfish reason to spend it all on herself. So, he kept it entirely separate and gave me the paperwork to hide. Beneath the thick trust documents sat a delicate envelope, deeply yellowed with age. I recognized my father's messy, looping handwriting in a heartbeat. It was the exact same familiar script that had cheerfully signed my birthday cards, my proud report cards, every single permission slip I ever brought home. I tore the flap open with violently shaking fingers. My darling Tessa, the fragile letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to protect you. But I need you to know I never stopped trying. I choked on a loud sob, reading on through a blinding curtain of tears. I know your mother has her deep flaws. I know she doesn't always put you first. That is not your fault, sweetheart. It was never your fault. This money is entirely yours. Use it to build the incredible life you deserve. Do not let anyone on this earth tell you that you are not good enough. I have known since the glorious day you were born that you would do extraordinary things. The letter ended with 3 simple, world-shifting words. I believe in you. For the very first time since watching his casket lower into the dirt, I let myself truly break down. I wept loudly, burying my face in my hands, washing away 3 years of suffocating silence and agonizing rejection. When I finally wiped my raw eyes, Pamela carefully took the original handwritten letter back. I will keep this safe for now, she said, her tone suddenly turning steel hard. When you eventually need undeniable proof of who they really are, I will be right here. I boarded the train back to Connecticut carrying a nuclear secret burning like a furnace in my chest. When I finally pushed Robert's heavy front door open, my mother was already standing there in the foyer. Her arms were tightly crossed, her expression ice cold. Where were you really? She snapped. I told you my study group, I lied smoothly. Do not lie to my face. Mrs. Patterson called looking for her own daughter. She said there was no study session this weekend. I slowly set my cheap canvas bag on the hardwood floor and looked her dead in the eye. I was completely done shrinking myself to make her comfortable. I went to see Aunt Pamela. All the warm color instantly drained from her perfectly made-up face. For a fleeting fraction of a second, something vulnerable flickered behind her eyes. Deep fear, maybe? A sudden flash of suffocating guilt? But just as quickly as it appeared, the mask snapped back into place, hardening into pure, venomous anger. I explicitly told you we do not speak to that side of the family anymore, she yelled. You told me, I corrected her quietly. You didn't ask me. This is my house. These are my rules, she screamed back. I held my ground. Actually, I whispered, my voice shockingly steady, it is Robert's house. The tense silence stretched tightly between us, vibrating like a piano wire about to violently snap. Heavy footsteps echoed from the hall. Robert appeared in the doorway, drawn like a shark to the scent of our sudden conflict. "What is going on out here?" he demanded. "She secretly went to Philadelphia," my mother hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me, "to see Daniel's sister." Robert's upper lip curled in pure disgust. The loudmouth who couldn't keep her useless opinions to herself at the wedding she wasn't invited to. He stepped aggressively closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl. You are living under my roof. You will follow my absolute rules. And my main rule is we do not associate with trash who disrespect this family." "They are my family," I fired back, my chin lifting defensively. "My father's family. Your father is dead." The cruel words hit me directly in the jaw like a brutal physical slap. I quickly glanced at my mother. She said absolutely nothing. She did nothing to defend the memory of the man who had loved her. Robert smiled, a chilling, victorious smirk. "After graduation day, you are out on the street. No useless negotiations, no pathetic second chances. You better start figuring out where you're going to go." I locked my gaze with his, refusing to let a single tear fall. I didn't flinch. "Don't worry about me," I stated with chilling calmness. "I already have." I picked up my bag, walking purposefully past both of them to my miserable little closet room, and firmly shut the door. 4 weeks, that was all the agonizing time I had left to endure their poison. And then, armed with my father's hidden sacrifice, I would step out of their shadow and build an empire they could never touch. Graduation day arrived with perfect bright May sunshine. The school lawn was packed with cheering families holding colorful balloons and giant bouquets. When the principal called my name, I walked across the wooden stage completely alone. I looked out into the crowd, my eyes scanning the 4th row where my family's empty folding chairs sat baking in the sun. My mother and Robert had other priorities. Dylan needed a brand new sporty car for his freshman year in Washington. He needed something flashy to make the right impression on his wealthy new friends. So, they spent my entire graduation morning browsing leather interiors at a luxury dealership. They chose a shiny car over my diploma. I smiled bravely for the hired photographer, tightly clutching the thin leather folder. When he cheerfully asked if any family members were joining me for a portrait, I simply shook my head and kept walking right off the grass. I spent that afternoon packing 3 faded duffel bags. That was it. Everything I had accumulated in 18 years of breathing fit into 3 rolling bags with plenty of room to spare. There were no childhood toys, no warm family photo albums, just clothes and basic survival gear. Before I dragged them to the front door, I stood in the hallway and took one last look at the converted storage closet. I stared at the peeling, water-stained ceiling and the tiny window that barely let in the morning light. I set a small, folded piece of paper on the pristine granite kitchen counter. "Thank you for teaching me exactly who I can depend on." Then I called a cheap cab, rode to the bustling train station, and bought a one-way ticket to Chicago. Aunt Pamela had worked a miracle from afar, arranging a tiny studio apartment near my new college campus. The rent was incredibly cheap and the neighborhood was safe enough. When I finally arrived and dropped my heavy bags on the scuffed hardwood floor, I reached out and turned the deadbolt. A heavy, solid click echoed in the empty room. A door I can lock, without asking anyone's permission. I collapsed onto the bare, springy mattress that first night. Outside, the glowing city lights flickered through the window like a million distant stars. My chest heaved. I felt a wild, terrifying rush pouring through my veins. It was absolute, exhilarating freedom. I didn't know then that I wouldn't hear my mother's voice for nearly 11 years. I just knew I had survived the hardest part. Now, it was time to build. But 11 years is an eternity to stay silent. The reality of true independence was brutal. I dragged myself to college classes by day, then scrubbed sticky espresso machines at a local coffee shop by night. I sliced my fingers raw, opening thick cardboard boxes. I survived on 4 hours of sleep and cheap noodles. Hunger constantly gnawed at my ribs. Deep exhaustion blurred my vision during morning lectures. But I forced myself to stop crying, because tears absolutely do not pay the rent. Every single grueling assignment, every tough freelance gig, every impossible client was a solid brick. I am building a fortress they can never ever tear down. By my sophomore year, I landed a lucky internship at a fierce little interior design firm downtown. The pay was honestly embarrassing, barely enough to cover my daily subway fare. But I absorbed more real knowledge in 8 months than most people learn in a lifetime. My boss, Sarah, noticed my sharp eye for detail. She slowly started trusting me with real blueprints. But the past wasn't done with me. My family didn't just want me gone, they wanted me permanently broken. I was 24, finally working as a paid junior designer, when my old nightmare violently kicked my door in. Dylan, he strolled into my firm on some corporate business trip, wearing a ridiculously expensive custom suit. He spotted me across the room, paused, and a nasty, familiar smirk spread across his face. Right there, in the middle of the open-plan office, he loudly demanded a meeting with Sarah. He pointed a manicured finger at my chest and called me a thief, a worthless liar, a runaway who stole from her generous family. He tried to get me fired on the very spot, standing there with his arms confidently crossed, waiting to watch my world burn to ashes. The entire office went dead silent. Keyboards stopped clicking. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the absolute end of my career. But Sarah, a woman forged in pure iron, slowly stood up from her desk. She looked Dylan up and down like he was a piece of trash stuck to her shoe, then calmly pointed straight to the elevator. "Get out of my firm right now, before I call security," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. When the glass doors closed behind his stunned face, I was shaking so hard my teeth rattled. I reached for an empty box, completely ready to pack up my desk and run away again. Sarah just walked over and slapped a fresh, blank blueprint down in front of me. "Tessa," she said, her sharp eyes piercing right through my rising panic. "The only revenge that actually matters is outbuilding them. Now get back to work." That was the exact second the scared little girl died. Dylan thought he came to Chicago to destroy my career. He had no idea he had just handed me the very match I needed to ignite the roaring fire of Tessa Matthews' interiors. By my junior year of college, the whispered rumors of my design work began to spread. I was no longer just the quiet girl in the back of the lecture hall. I was a weapon. Clients started requesting me specifically. I launched a side hustle, transforming cramped, gloomy apartments into breathtaking spaces where tired people actually wanted to breathe and live. My portfolio swelled, and for the first time in my life, my bank account did too. Senior year, I walked across the graduation stage with magna cum laude honors. No empty folding chairs this time, just a fierce pride swelling in my chest. 4 massive firms threw job offers at my feet. I picked the hungriest one, the place that promised me the most aggressive room to grow. At 26, I clawed my way up to lead designer at a prestigious Chicago firm. Glossy industry magazines suddenly featured my massive projects on their front covers. Wealthy clients with dizzying 7-figure budgets demanded my vision by name. By 28, I finally took the ultimate leap. I opened the heavy glass doors to my very own studio, Tessa Matthews Interiors. I hired a brilliant, fiercely loyal small team. Our glowing reputation skyrocketed, attracting a client list that included the most elite, influential zip codes in the entire city. Through every single victory, I guarded my success like a dangerous secret. I completely erased myself from social media. I rejected flashy public interviews. I left absolutely zero digital crumbs for certain toxic people to track. Aunt Pamela was the only soul on earth who knew the glorious truth. She had seamlessly become my real family in every single way that mattered. And then, like a gentle sunrise after a decade of dark storms, came Mitchell. I bumped into him at a crowded architecture networking event when I was 27. He had a warm, rumbling laugh and remarkably patient eyes. He became my safe harbor. He never once pushed me to confront my painful history before I was fully ready. He just loved me, simply and purely. Meanwhile, my mother remained a ghost. She never called, not one single time in 11 long years. But I was about to discover the sickening reason why. The heavy invitation arrived on a gloomy, rain-soaked Wednesday in early October. I almost tossed it directly into the recycling bin, assuming it was just another fancy charity gala request begging for donations. But the elegant return address made my heart completely stop beating. Townsend Residence, Greenwich, Connecticut. My hands went numb. Inside the envelope sat a thick, cream-colored card, heavily embossed with dripping silver lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 12th wedding anniversary of Laura and Robert Townsend." 12 years. My mother had been married to the man who threw me away for 12 years, and this was her very first attempt to reach out. I dialed Aunt Pamela the second I locked my apartment door. "I got something incredibly strange in the mail today," I whispered, staring blindly at the silver letters. When I read it to her, the phone line went dead quiet for a long, heavy moment. "I have heard troubling things," Pamela finally murmured, measuring her words carefully. "Through old friends from their wealthy neighborhood, Robert's precious business is failing badly. Something about a disastrous expansion project. They have been forced to make deep, embarrassing financial cuts. People are starting to notice the cracks." She paused, taking a breath. Your mother has practically vanished from her expensive charity appearances. Word is, their elite country club membership is currently suspended for unpaid dues. I stared down at the shiny invitation resting on my kitchen counter. You really think that is why they suddenly want me there? Tessa, Pamela sighed softly. Your mother has never done a single thing in her entire life without a selfish reason. She was absolutely right. Laura Townsend operated purely on cold math. If she was randomly extending an olive branch after a decade of brutal silence, it wasn't because she missed her daughter's face. It was because she desperately needed something from me. What are you going to do? Pamela asked, her tone protective. I picked up the thick card, running my thumb over the raised silver ink. I am going to go. Are you completely sure? Not for her, I stated, a new fiery resolve hardening in my stomach. For me, I need to permanently close this chapter. Pamela let out a breath. If you need heavy backup, I still have your father's original letter locked in my safe. I hadn't forgotten that letter. I never would. During the tense weeks leading up to the gala, I found myself doing something completely irrational. I bought a wildly expensive gift. Mitchell stood leaning against our dining table, watching closely as I wrapped it. It was a sleek, heavy box wrapped in deep forest green silk paper, tied off with a flawless gold ribbon. His handsome face shifted between deep confusion and quiet concern. You are honestly bringing them a present? I know exactly how crazy it looks. Help me understand, Tess. These people treated you like absolute garbage. They literally threw you out into the street. 11 years of dead silence, and now you are buying them a gift? I smoothed the silk ribbon carefully, aligning the perfect bow. It is not about who they are. It is about who I choose to be. Hidden inside that beautiful green box rested a single silver key on a velvet cushion. Directly beneath it sat a crisp property deed. A gorgeous 3-bedroom condo located in a peaceful tree-lined neighborhood right here in Chicago. It wasn't wildly flashy, but it was incredibly solid, safe, the exact kind of beautiful place where a broken woman could actually start over. It cost $580,000. Money I had bled for, earned entirely by myself. Dollar by grueling dollar, late night by exhausting late night. I want to give her one final test, I explained to him, my voice barely above a whisper. A real one. If she has genuinely changed, if there is even a tiny fraction of her soul that actually regrets destroying us, this house could be her new beginning. Mitchell walked over and gently folded my hands into his. And if she hasn't changed at all? Then at least I will know for a fact that I tried. He didn't argue. That was one of the million reasons I loved him so much. The evening before my flight, I carefully slipped a secret weapon into my evening clutch. A high-quality copy of my dad's handwritten letter, bundled tightly with official bank documents proving the entire history of the trust fund. It was undeniable proof that every single thing I possessed, I had built squarely on the loving foundation my father gave me. Not stolen, not borrowed, mine. I truly prayed to God I wouldn't need to pull those papers out, but I had learned a brutal lesson as a teenager. Hope and preparation are two completely different things. I packed my bag thinking I was just walking into an awkward family reunion to offer a peace treaty, but what I didn't know was that my mother had spent the last decade spinning a massive psychotic web of lies, and I was stepping directly into the jaws of a trap far more humiliating and vicious than I could have ever imagined. Let me pause the story right here for just one quick second. I am genuinely curious about something. If you were standing exactly in my shoes, would you have actually walked into that party? Drop a yes in the comments if you would have faced your demons head on, or a no if you think I should have stayed far, far away to protect my peace. And hey, if you are feeling the heavy pulse of this story so far, hit that like button so I know to keep going. Alright, let's go back to that chilly November night. I pulled my car up to the grand entrance of the elite Greenwich Country Club. It looked exactly like I remembered from the glossy photographs my mother used to proudly post online, back before she mysteriously stopped posting anything at all. Massive crystal chandeliers dripped like frozen rain from the soaring vaulted ceilings. Dozens of round tables were dressed in flawless white linen. A professional string quartet played a soft classical melody in the corner, trying to mask the scent of desperation in the room. Roughly 60 wealthy guests milled about the space, lightly tapping expensive champagne flutes together. Their polite, hollow laughter echoed loudly off the polished marble floors. When I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and walked in completely alone, heads physically turned. The string music seemed to dip. A ripple of harsh whispers immediately followed my footsteps like a dark shadow. Is that Laura's estranged daughter? The wild one who disappeared years ago? I heard she has been struggling terribly, living hand to mouth in some dangerous part of the city. I heard every single cruel word, but I kept my expression perfectly neutral. My long navy evening gown was simple, but it was dangerously expensive. It was the exact kind of understated, flawless elegance that people with real, quiet money instantly recognize. My hair was pulled back tightly in a low, sleek French twist. In my steady hands, I carried the heavy forest green box. My armor was absolutely impenetrable. I spotted my mother across the massive room a full minute before her eyes finally found me. Laura Townsend stood like a queen at the center of a tight cluster of older women. She was gesturing animatedly, her sparkling silver anniversary jewelry catching the chandelier light with every movement. She had aged well, or rather, she had aged very expensively. Her bright smile was highly practiced. It was the flawless plastic smile of someone who had spent her entire adult life perfecting a public performance. Then, she turned her head. Her eyes locked onto mine. That perfect smile completely froze for one fractured second. A rapid flicker of chaotic emotions crossed her face. Shock, frantic calculation, bitter annoyance. But right before the heavy social mask slid smoothly back into place, she made her choice. She didn't rush across the room to greet her only child. She didn't even offer a polite wave. She simply gave me a tiny, rigid nod, the exact same dismissive way you might acknowledge a waiter bringing more bread. "Tessa!" I slowly turned around. Dylan stood directly behind me, a half-empty champagne glass dangling from his fingers. He was smirking like we were childhood best friends sharing an inside joke. "So, the tragic prodigal daughter finally returns," he mocked. He looked me slowly up and down, his eyes dripping with fake pity. "Coming crawling back to beg for some table scraps?" I didn't flinch. I met his arrogant gaze evenly, my voice smooth as glass. "I am here because I was invited." "Sure you were," he snorted, taking an arrogant sip of his drink. He took an aggressive step closer, trying to invade my personal space. "Word of friendly advice, Tess. Don't embarrass yourself tonight. Nobody in this room cares about you." I smiled slightly, tilting my head, "Then nobody should mind if I decide to stay." Dylan hadn't changed one bit. 33 years old, and he was still lazily coasting on his mother's fading family business shares. What tiny fraction was left of it anyway? I had done my careful research before coming. That prestigious Washington University degree they bought him had led to absolutely nothing. He had bounced miserably between useless consulting jobs, each title more vague and pathetic than the last. Finally, he gave up and returned home to work for Robert in some completely made-up management position. "Let me guess," Dylan sneered, swirling the golden liquid in his glass. "You are just here sniffing around for a quick handout." "I told you, I am here because I received a formal invitation." "Right," he laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "My stepmother told us she just felt incredibly sorry for you. She said you would probably show up wearing something stained from goodwill, but we should all try to be gracious to the poor girl anyway." I felt the familiar hot burn of sudden anger flare in my chest, but I had spent 11 grueling years learning exactly how to keep my fire contained. "Is that what she told everyone?" I asked mildly. Dylan leaned in closer, dropping his voice conspiratorially. "Oh, among other hilarious things. She told everyone that you couldn't even hold down a minimum wage job, that you constantly blamed everyone else for your massive failures, that you are basically homeless and begging on the streets." So, that was her brilliant narrative. My mother had spent a solid decade painting me as her personal tragic cautionary tale. The deeply ungrateful, unstable daughter who simply couldn't survive without her mommy. "Interesting," I said calmly. Dylan frowned, confused by my total lack of tears. "What is so interesting?" "That she talks about my life so confidently," I replied, staring a hole right through him. "Especially since she hasn't picked up a phone to call me in 11 years. Dylan's nasty smirk finally faltered, sliding off his face. "Whatever," he grumbled, taking a step back. "Just do not cause a psychotic scene. We have important investors here." He nodded sharply toward the beautiful green box in my hands. "And do not expect anyone to be impressed by whatever cheap junk that is. We all know you can't afford anything decent." I desperately thought about telling him the truth right then. I daydreamed about watching his arrogant face completely shatter when he realized exactly who I had become and whose league he was actually standing in. But no, not yet. Not in the shadows near the coat check. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dripping with icy politeness. "I should really go congratulate the happy couple." I walked right past him, my heels clicking sharply against the marble. heading straight toward the lavish main table where my mother sat surveying her wealthy court. The green box felt heavier in my arms with every single step. This was it, the exact moment I had rehearsed in the pitch dark for over a decade. I was walking straight into the belly of the beast, fully expecting to hand over a peace offering, but in less than 60 seconds I was going to realize my mother hadn't invited me to heal our family. She had invited me to be the final, sacrificial lamb in her sick, twisted financial game. The space around the main table grew completely silent as I slowly approached. The air felt dangerously thin, like the terrifying seconds before a massive storm. Robert sat firmly at my mother's right side, swirling a dark glass of whiskey. His cruel face had grown much harder over the years, deep, bitter lines carved into his cheeks, and a permanent, angry furrow rested heavily between his brows. The dark look he shot me was the exact same venomous glare he had weaponized the afternoon he threw me into the street. I stopped directly in front of their lavish centerpiece. I placed the beautifully wrapped green box onto the crisp white tablecloth. "Happy anniversary, Mom." "Evelyn, look, my beautiful daughter is finally here." Laura suddenly shrieked, jumping up from her chair. Her voice was dripping with thick, artificial honey. She lunged forward and grabbed my bare arm. Her manicured nails dug into my skin, violently yanking me closer to parade me in front of the elegant, silver-haired woman sitting beside her. "Evelyn, this is my Tessa," she cheered loudly. "The brilliant founder of Tessa Matthews Interiors, the famous designer I was just telling you about." My entire body turned to solid ice. Dylan dropped his crystal champagne flute. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. But nobody even flinched. The horrifying reality hit me like a speeding train. They already knew. My mother had secretly tracked my success. She hadn't mailed that invitation to heal our broken past. She had lured me here to use me as a shiny prop. Aunt Pamela was absolutely right. Robert's fragile company was practically bankrupt, and they desperately needed Evelyn Barnes's wealthy husband to sign a massive investment check. They needed to parade the successful daughter to magically prove their toxic family was completely solid. Utterly disgusted, I violently snatched my arm out of her painful grip, taking a massive step backward. "I am just here because I received a card in the mail," I stated coldly. My steady voice sliced cleanly over the soft string music. The fake smile instantly snapped right off my mother's face. The wealthy women sitting at the table exchanged highly suspicious glances. The multi-million-dollar investment was visibly slipping right through Robert's sweaty fingers. Realizing his final lifeline was dying, Robert completely lost his mind. His face flushed a dangerous boiling purple. He leaped up, his heavy chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. He grabbed the green gift box and shoved it violently into my chest, hitting me hard enough that I had to catch it to keep from falling. "We do not need your cheap, pathetic gift," his voice roared, carrying brutally across the entire room. "Take your garbage and get out." Seeing her brilliant manipulative plan turn to absolute ashes, my mother instantly reverted to her true, vicious default setting. "He is absolutely right. You are entirely embarrassing yourself. You are a useless freeloader, Tessa. You only came here tonight to humiliate us, same as always." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the hired musicians completely stopped dragging their bows across the strings. 60 pairs of judgmental eyes burned holes into my skin. Some guests looked pitying, others deeply curious. I could feel my own heartbeat hammering wildly against my temples. For one terrifying second, the confident woman vanished. I saw my frightened 15-year-old self standing in that gloomy hallway, being told there was zero money for her future. I saw my 18-year-old self dragging 3 cheap duffel bags out into the cold morning air. I saw every single broken version of me who had ever been told she wasn't good enough. But then, something incredibly powerful rose up inside my chest, something fierce that had been quietly building for 14 grueling years. A total calmness washed over my racing mind. I looked at my furious mother, at red-faced Robert, and at the massive crowd of strangers who foolishly thought they knew my tragic story. And I laughed. It wasn't a bitter, ugly sound. It was a genuine, breathtakingly soft laugh of pure release. The heavy, invisible chains finally snapped. "What on earth is so funny?" my mother hissed, stepping closer like a cornered snake. "Nothing," I replied, holding the crushed green box remarkably steady. "I am just thinking about how you have absolutely no idea what you just refused." "Excuse me," she spat. "You wanted to know what cheap junk is inside?" I asked smoothly, pulling the edge of the gold ribbon. "Fine. Let me show everyone exactly what you just threw away." The entire ballroom collectively leaned forward, holding their breath. Even Robert's vicious sneer flickered with a sudden uncertainty. What happened in the next 60 seconds was something no one in that building would ever forget. I set the opened box right back down in the center of the tablecloth where every guest had a perfect view. Resting flawlessly on the forest green velvet was one gleaming silver key. Directly beneath it, folded precisely, lay a thick stack of official legal documents. I slowly lifted the silver key first, letting it catch the dazzling chandelier light. "This," I announced, my voice ringing out clear, "is the front door key to a beautiful 3-bedroom condominium in Chicago. A luxury Lincoln Park doorman building. Excellent schools nearby." Shocked murmurs instantly rippled through the wealthy crowd like a sudden gust of wind. I carefully unfolded the thick documents and held them up high. "This is the legal property deed, fully paid in cash, no mortgage." I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch. "It is currently valued at approximately $580,000. My mother's jaw physically dropped open. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. She closed her mouth, then opened it again like a gasping fish. "I was going to give it to you," I told her directly, locking onto her panicked eyes. "A safe place you could escape to if you ever needed a completely fresh start. A pure gift, from your daughter." The elegant woman sitting beside my frozen mother gasped audibly. "Laura," Evelyn cried out, horrified. "You specifically told me your beautiful daughter was thriving, yet you just screamed at her and called her a worthless freeloader with a cheap gift?" Laura's voice had completely lost its smooth, practiced quality. Now it sounded raw and desperate. "You earned that kind of money doing what?" "Running my very own firm, Tessa Matthews Interiors," I replied, my chin held high. "We specialize exclusively in high-end residential design." I let the massive weight of that truth settle over the room. "You actually might have seen our team's work featured in Elle Decor magazine last spring." The hushed whispers rapidly grew into a loud roar. A man standing near the open bar quickly yanked his smartphone from his pocket, typing rapidly to search my name. "That is completely impossible," Dylan blurted from the shadows behind me. "You are totally lying. Google it," I challenged him coldly. Robert's face had drained from boiling purple to a sickly, terrifying shade of pale gray. My mother looked exactly like she had been forcibly slapped across the cheek. "Mom, you happily told everyone else here tonight that I was hopelessly struggling," I continued, pushing my advantage. "That I couldn't hold down a simple job. That I was practically begging on the streets. But to Evelyn, you wildly bragged about my massive success just to secure a giant investment check." I gestured gracefully toward the shiny silver key. "Does this look like I am struggling?" No one dared to answer. The very first giant crack had violently appeared in my mother's carefully constructed fortress of lies, and I wasn't anywhere near finished tearing it down. The heavy tension stretched until Evelyn Barnes finally stepped forward. She was silver-haired, fiercely elegant, and possessed sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I recognized her striking face from the old funeral photos I had kept hidden. "Laura." Evelyn's voice was frigid, precise, and utterly lethal. "You told half the people in this room that your child was a tragic, unemployed mess, living entirely off the charity of strangers. And you told my husband she was your greatest pride and joy." My mother opened her mouth to spin another lie, but her throat simply closed up. Nothing came out. "Mrs. Barnes," I said, nodding to her with deep, genuine respect. "It is an honor to see you again." Evelyn's hardened expression softened just a fraction. "I am incredibly glad to see you are doing so well, Tessa." Despite the horrific fiction I was led to believe, the twisted lies were finally bleeding out onto the pristine tablecloth. But as the wealthy crowd started pulling out their glowing phones to uncover the rest of my mother's dark secrets, I reached into my clutch to pull out the one piece of paper that would permanently burn her fake empire to the ground. A restless murmur ripped through the wealthy crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Bright phone screens illuminated the dim space. I watched guests frantically typing, reading, and passing their devices back and forth. "They are finally seeing the real me. She really is a famous designer," a man whispered loudly near the ice sculpture. "Look at this website, it's massive." I shifted my focus squarely back to my mother. "You never called me," I stated, my tone dropping to a dangerous, steady calm. "Not one single time in 11 long years. So, I am extremely curious. Where exactly did you get all this tragic information about my daily life?" Total silence swallowed her. She swallowed hard, trapped. "You didn't," I answered for her when she refused to speak. "You completely made it up. You fed these people whatever dark fairy tale made you look like a helpless victim. I was just protecting our family's fragile reputation, she stammered defensively. By lying about your own daughter? Evelyn demanded, crossing her arms. The older woman's sharp gaze felt like a laser beam. Laura, is this horrific display actually true? Have you been fabricating malicious stories about your own flesh and blood? Robert aggressively grabbed his wife's arm, his fingers digging into her silk sleeve. Do not answer that right now. Why not? I challenged, refusing to back down. Keep pushing. Break the illusion. What else does she desperately need to hide? The entire ballroom was fully captivated now, watching us like eager spectators at a high-stakes criminal trial. I could actually feel the massive shift happening in real time. Heavy doubt was spreading across the room like rapid cracks in a frozen lake. While we are finally being so honest, I continued, projecting my voice so the folks in the back row could catch every syllable. Let's talk about what really happened right after my beloved dad died. Let's discuss his massive life insurance policy, and where all that money actually went. All the remaining color completely vanished from my mother's cheeks. Tessa, please don't what? I shot back. Tell the absolute truth? I reached deep into my silk clutch. My fingers brushed against the familiar, comforting texture of folded paper. I pulled out the precious document. Its edges were heavily yellowed, deeply creased from countless nights of me holding it against my chest while I cried myself to sleep. This is a handwritten letter, I announced clearly, holding it up for the crowd to witness. Penned by my father, Daniel Matthews, shortly before he passed away. Evelyn's jeweled hand immediately flew to her chest. Your sweet dad wrote you a final letter? He absolutely did. I unfolded the fragile pages incredibly slowly, treating them like sacred treasure, and I firmly believe every single person standing here tonight needs to hear a small piece of it. My mother suddenly lunged forward, her manicured claws swiping frantically at the air. Give me that right now. Robert yanked her forcefully backward, holding her tightly by the waist. His own face was ashen, slick with cold sweat. I took a deep breath, anchoring myself, and began to read aloud. My darling Tessa, if you are reading these words, it sadly means I am no longer there to protect you. My voice stayed remarkably strong, pushing through the heavy emotional tremor rattling my ribcage. I know your mom has her deep flaws. I know she does not always put you first. That is not your fault, my sweetheart. It was never your fault. Somewhere near the front row, a woman softly sniffled, wiping her mascara with a napkin. I have securely put aside money just for you, entirely separate from anything Laura can access. Use it to build the incredible life you truly deserve. Please do not let anyone tell you that you are not good enough. I slowly lowered the trembling paper. He always knew. I locked my watery eyes directly onto my mother's terrified face. He knew exactly who you were. He knew that if a tragedy ever struck, you wouldn't take care of his little girl. So he made other secret arrangements. Daniel wrote those exact words? Evelyn's voice hovered barely above a stunned whisper. She slowly turned to face her supposed friend. Laura, you sat in my living room and swore he left nothing for Tessa. You cried and told me his cheap insurance policy barely covered the cost of his wooden casket. My mother squeezed her eyes shut, saying absolutely nothing. The official payout was over $250,000, I revealed quietly, letting the massive number hang heavily in the tense air. I never saw a single solitary penny of it. Every dime went straight into buying this giant house, funding Dylan's elite education, purchasing a shiny new sports car, and paying for that luxury country club membership you love so much. The crowd's shocked murmuring instantly escalated into a low, angry roar. Disgust painted every face. Robert pulled his trembling wife close, whispering frantically into her ear. She looked exactly like a drowning woman watching her carefully built, fake universe permanently crumble into dust. For the very first time in 14 long years, she had absolutely no script to read from. Let me pause right here for just one quick moment. Can you guess how my toxic mother reacted to being publicly exposed like this? Drop your best prediction down in the comments section. I would love to see if anyone actually gets it right. And if this intense journey is hitting close to home for you, smash that like button. It really helps push these videos to other people, especially those who desperately might need to hear this message today. Now here is exactly what happened next. My mother recovered her balance much faster than I could have ever expected. Shiny tears rapidly welled up in her widened eyes. They were the exact same fake, manipulative tears I had watched her summon a million times before whenever she desperately needed an audience's deep sympathy. Tessa, my sweet girl, she whimpered. Her voice cracked flawlessly. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. I am so deeply sorry. I truly didn't know. I honestly didn't realize how badly I had hurt you. She reached her shaking hands out toward the green velvet box resting on the table. Please let me make this right. We can start entirely over. I am your mother. I quickly grabbed the heavy box and pulled it sharply backward before her greedy fingers could even graze the ribbon. No. The single word hung suspended in the chilled air. What do you mean, no? Her fake tears dried up instantly, evaporating into thin air. They were rapidly replaced by something infinitely sharper, darker, and deeply cruel. I specifically brought this beautiful gift for someone who actually deserved it, I stated, my posture rigid. Someone who might genuinely want a real, loving relationship with me. I closed the open lid with a very soft, definitive click. You are clearly not that person. You cannot do this to me. Her voice shrilly rose, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Not in front of everyone. You did it first. The entire ballroom had gone completely, deathly still. Nobody dared to breathe. 5 short minutes ago, you gladly called me a pathetic freeloader in front of every single person standing here, I reminded her, my tone like crushed ice. I heard you tell them I was worthless, that I couldn't survive on my own 2 feet. You have been feeding them that exact poison for over a decade. That was totally different, she shrieked. How? I calmly tucked the massive box tightly under my arm. You publicly humiliated me. You ruthlessly lied about my entire existence, and now you suddenly want what I have? That is not how a real family works. Evelyn took a slow step closer, watching our fiery exchange with a strange mixture of absolute fascination and something that looked incredibly like genuine respect. If I am being brutally honest, I continued, staring down the woman who gave birth to me, I flew here hoping you had finally changed, hoping there was some hidden tiny version of you who actually wanted a daughter, rather than an easy target. My mother's innocent mask slipped entirely off, shattering on the floor. Pure, ugly fury blazed wildly underneath her skin. You ungrateful little. I am very grateful, I sharply cut her off, refusing to let her finish the insult. I am incredibly grateful I learned extremely early exactly who you truly are. I finally turned my back on her, facing the heavy wooden exit doors. This condo will safely go to someone who actually loves me. She thought she had backed me into a corner, but as I turned to leave her ruined party, Robert suddenly lunged forward, blocking my only path to the exit with a terrifyingly dark look in his eyes. Robert stepped squarely in front of me before I could reach the heavy exit doors. He used his broad shoulders as a physical barricade, refusing to let me pass. But his vicious demeanor had completely vanished. Now hold on just a minute. His voice shifted into something sickeningly friendly. It was the exact, oily tone of a desperate salesman sensing a massive deal slipping through his fingers. Let's not be too hasty here. We are family, Tessa. All families have silly disagreements. Family? You have got to be kidding me. We are not family, I stated flatly, my gaze locked onto his panicked eyes. You made that crystal clear 14 years ago. Harsh things were simply said in the heat of the moment, he stammered, holding up his hands defensively. You looked a grieving teenager in the face and said your grand house doesn't support freeloaders. I met his stare without flinching a single muscle. So I packed my bags, left, and built my very own house. Why are you complaining about it now? Dylan suddenly appeared at his father's elbow. His usual arrogant swagger was entirely gone. Look, Tess, I know we haven't always, he trailed off, stumbling awkwardly, searching for humble words he had never needed to use in his entire spoiled life. But this is crazy. You cannot just walk out of here holding a $500,000 condo. I can do whatever I want with my hard-earned money. It's just... Dylan let out a highly nervous, pathetic laugh. Come on, we are practically siblings. I felt a wave of pure nausea hit my stomach. We are complete strangers who happen to share a mailing address for 3 miserable years, and in that home you got absolutely everything handed to you on a silver platter. I got a dark storage closet. Robert tried one last, desperate angle. What if we just sat down and talked about this like rational adults? Maybe there is some sort of mutually beneficial arrangement we can figure out? I am not interested in your arrangements. I stepped firmly past them both, refusing to stop. As I reached for the brass handle, I heard a ragged gasp. My mother had finally risen from her chair. Her expensive makeup was heavily streaked down her cheeks where the dark mascara had run. Real tears this time, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply a much better theatrical performance because the stakes were finally real. Tessa, her voice violently cracked. She looked incredibly small. "Tessa, please don't go. I made terrible mistakes. I know that now. Just give me one more chance." I paused at the doorway and turned back one final time. I looked at the ruined woman who had spent my entire childhood choosing herself. "You had chances, Mom," I said softly, the tragic truth echoing through the dead silent ballroom. 14 long years of chances. You chose your own comfort every single time. I swept my gaze across the massive room full of wealthy witnesses. I saw their highly shocked faces, heard their frantic whispered conversations, and noticed their glowing phones still clutched tightly in their manicured hands. The illusion was permanently broken. When you are actually ready for a real relationship, one based entirely on mutual respect, and not just what shiny things you can extract from me, you have my phone number. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the crisp, cool November night. The door swung shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud. It felt exactly like a final punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I took a massive breath of fresh air. My lungs felt lighter than they had in a decade. Mitchell was waiting patiently by the window when I finally unlocked my apartment door. He didn't pepper me with rapid-fire questions or demand all the messy details right away. He just walked over, wrapped his strong arms around my shaking shoulders, and held on tight while the chaotic adrenaline slowly drained out of my exhausted body. "How do you feel?" he murmured into my hair. I closed my eyes and truly considered the heavy question. "Free," he smiled warmly. "Good answer." My cell phone started buzzing violently inside my purse before I had even taken off my wool coat. Then it simply didn't stop. 52 missed calls from my frantic mother, 15 voicemails from Robert, 9 desperate texts from Dylan, a dozen random numbers I didn't even recognize, probably greedy guests from the party who had somehow tracked down my personal contact info. Text messages flooded my glowing screen, one right after another. "Tessa, please call me back. We desperately need to talk. I am so incredibly sorry. I didn't mean any of those awful things. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. Call me, please." Mitchell watched the glass screen light up again and again. "Are you going to answer any of those?" "Not tonight." I swiftly silenced the device and set it face down on the cool granite counter. "Maybe not ever." We ordered warm takeout and ate quietly on our comfortable couch, while the beautiful city glittered brightly outside our windows. My phone screen lit up periodically in my peripheral vision, a persistent flashing pulse of extreme desperation that I no longer felt legally or morally obligated to acknowledge. "What happens now?" Mitchell asked gently, taking my empty plate. "I don't know." I leaned my tired head against his shoulder, finally letting myself feel exactly how bone-deep exhausted I truly was. I gave them the raw truth. What they decide to do with it is their problem now. "And the luxury condo?" I smiled softly in the dark. "I already have someone incredibly special in mind." For the very first time in 14 years, the crushing weight I had been dragging around, the constant grinding awareness of being utterly unwanted by the specific people who were supposed to love me the most, finally felt incredibly light. Maybe the deep scars would never disappear completely. But tonight, watching the glowing city lights alongside a man who chose me freely, it was enough. More than enough. The massive fallout arrived in jagged, satisfying pieces over the following week. Aunt Pamela called first thing Monday morning, barely able to contain her fierce satisfaction. "You will never guess what I just heard," she laughed warmly. Evelyn Barnes, it turned out, ruled quite a large, incredibly powerful social circle. By Monday afternoon, the explosive story of the ruined anniversary party had spread like a raging wildfire through every elite women's group, charity committee, and country club dining room in a 60-mile radius. Laura frantically tried to do desperate damage control. Pamela reported that my mother was crying to anyone who would listen, claiming everyone had simply misunderstood the situation, that my dad's letter was a clever forgery, that I had always been a deeply difficult, unstable child. Did anyone actually believe her pathetic spin? Not after 3 separate, highly respected guests confirmed they had heavily Googled my design company right there at the dinner table. "Your website gained 1,800 unique visitors that night alone," Pamela revealed, a note of grim, victorious pride ringing in her tone. The harsh business consequences rapidly came next. Robert, I learned through the grapevine, had been right in the middle of negotiating a major, life-saving contract with a regional supplier. The supplier's CEO happened to be a very close personal friend of Evelyn Barnes. After hearing the horrific details of what happened at the gala, and realizing Robert was actively lying about his family's stability to secure huge funds, They immediately requested additional time to carefully review the contract terms. That additional time stretched into agonizing weeks. The deal eventually went through, but at significantly less favorable terms that kept Robert's company barely gasping for air. Even Dylan didn't escape the blast radius. His biological mother, Robert's wealthy first wife, caught wind of the humiliating spectacle, absolutely disgusted by how her ex-husband had tried to aggressively sabotage my career in Chicago, and appalled by her own son's cowardly behavior at the party. She took swift action. She immediately froze Dylan's massive shares in their maternal family business, ruthlessly cutting off his lavish playboy lifestyle overnight. Honestly, none of this ultimate karma brought me deep joy. I didn't stalk my mother's silent social media accounts looking for satisfying signs of her suffering. I didn't tally up the specific ways the universe had violently balanced the scales, but there was something quietly, profoundly healing about knowing the truth was finally walking around in the broad daylight. For years, my toxic mother had completely controlled the narrative. Now the narrative had brutally corrected itself. Pamela asked me gently if I regretted any part of that night. No, I told her honestly, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. I just wish I had found the courage to do it sooner. She laughed, a warm, rich sound. Your father would be so incredibly proud of the woman you are. I looked up at the ceiling. I truly hoped so. The blinding dust was finally settling, and my mother's shiny empire of lies was reduced to miserable rubble. But just as I thought the brutal war was permanently over, my silent phone suddenly lit up with the one incoming call I swore I would never ever answer. 2 weeks after the catastrophic anniversary party, my phone lit up with her name. I stared at the glowing screen, my pulse drumming against my ribs. Do I answer? Do I let it ring forever? I took a slow, deep breath and swiped right. Just once, for total closure. Tessa. Her voice was entirely hoarse, violently stripped of its usual glossy polish. Thank you for picking up. I almost didn't think you would. A long, heavy pause stretched between us. I waited, refusing to fill the quiet air to make her comfortable. I want you to know. She took a shaky, ragged breath. I have been thinking deeply about everything you said, about the horrible choices I made. I know I wasn't the mother you desperately needed. This was the exact cinematic moment where I was supposed to soften. The part where the good daughter says it is okay, that all is forgiven, and we can magically start fresh. I didn't. What specifically do you regret, Mom? I asked quietly. Silence. Because from where I am standing, I continued, my tone gentle but unyielding, it sounds very much like you just regret getting caught, not what you actually did to me. That is not. She stopped, stumbled, started again. When your father died, I was utterly terrified. I grew up with absolutely nothing, Tessa. My own mother was abandoned with 3 hungry kids and 0 money. I swore on my life that would never be me. Fear. It was always just fear. So you happily abandoned me instead, I pointed out. I didn't see it that way. I know, that is the entire problem. I heard her crying through the speaker. Real, agonizing crying this time. The ugly, graceless, gasping kind. I just wanted to be safe, she whispered brokenly. I was so insanely scared of ending up with nothing. I understood fear. I had lived in its cold shadow for 14 years. I kept my voice perfectly firm. But being scared does not ever give you the right to destroy the people who depend on you. What can I possibly do? She begged. How do I fix this mess? I honestly don't know if you can. I took a steadying breath, laying down my final brick. But if you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, it has to be entirely real, equal. No more sick manipulation, no more tragic stories about me to your rich friends, and absolutely no calling to ask for cash or favors. Do you understand? A much longer pause. I understand. I truly hope so, Mom. I really do. I hung up the phone. It wasn't warm forgiveness, but it was a solid, unbreakable boundary. My mother had begged for a second chance, but she had absolutely no idea that I had already given my greatest prize to the one woman who truly earned it. 8 months later, I officially gave away the luxury condo, not to my mother, to Aunt Pamela. She stood frozen in the middle of the sunlit, empty living room, hot tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She clutched the silver key against her chest like a vital lifeline. Tessa, sweetheart, I cannot possibly accept this. You absolutely can, I whispered, wrapping my arms around her tight. You are the one who saved me. You kept my dad's sacred promise when the rest of the world looked away. This beautiful home is yours. She had spent 25 exhausting years trapped in that tiny Philadelphia apartment, drowning in nursing school debt, working brutal double shifts at the hospital just to survive. She deserved a peaceful space with giant windows, a friendly doorman, and kind neighbors who brought warm cookies at Christmas. This time there were no terrifying foreclosure warnings sitting on her kitchen counter, just the shiny keys to her brand new life. Meanwhile, the glossy feature in Elle Decor magazine acted like rocket fuel. It quickly led to 3 massive, high-profile clients. My dedicated team expanded from 5 hardworking people to 9. And Mitchell? He proposed on a quiet, rainy Thursday evening right in our living room. There was no flashy fanfare, no hidden cameras, no giant audience, just the 2 of us, a shared pizza, and a delicate vintage ring that had belonged to his beloved grandmother. I joyfully built a real family, not the broken one I was tragically born into, but the beautiful one I actively chose. Pamela, Mitchell, Sarah, my old college roommate who let me sleep on her floor during the starving years. They were my true anchor. My mother started calling about once a month. Short, polite, surface-level conversations. She never once dared to ask about the Chicago condo again. Robert's failing business eventually stabilized, just barely. Dylan supposedly got a real job in corporate sales, according to the distant grapevine. Whether any of them had actually healed their toxic souls, or simply learned how to hide their true colors better, I couldn't say. And honestly, it didn't matter anymore. I had spent so many agonizing years desperately waiting for my mother to love me the way I needed, waiting for her to loudly choose me, to somehow prove that I was actually worth something. What I finally beautifully understood was that I had been asking the wrong question my entire life. The real question was never whether I was worth loving. It was whether she was emotionally capable of it. Sometimes, late at night when the city goes quiet, I write private letters I will never mail. This specific one is addressed to a terrified 15-year-old girl, standing alone in a dark hallway, being viciously told she isn't worth a simple $10,000 investment. Dear Tessa, I know you are so scared right now. I know you are lying awake in that cramped little room staring at the stained ceiling, wondering if they are right about you. Wondering if you are truly as worthless as they make you feel. You are not. The adults who were supposed to fiercely protect you selfishly chose themselves instead. That is their tragic failure, not yours. Their pathetic inability to love does not mean you are unlovable. You are going to survive this nightmare. Even better, you are going to build something breathtaking from the smoking wreckage. It won't be easy. There will be dark nights you cry yourself to sleep, and freezing mornings you are not sure you can keep walking. Keep walking anyway. One glorious day, you will stand tall in a giant room full of people who believe the absolute worst about you, and you will speak the raw truth without blinking. You will walk away with your head held incredibly high and your beautiful heart entirely intact, and you will finally realize their cheap approval was never what you needed. What you needed was permission to stubbornly believe in yourself. Dad already gave you that gift. The rest is entirely up to you. I gently close the leather journal and gaze out the large window at the sprawling city spread out beneath me. The morning sun is just coming up over Chicago, painting the sky in bright, promising strokes of pink and gold. My father was right. I did fly incredibly high, not because of the hidden money he left me, but because he beautifully taught me what real, pure love looks like. Patient, selfless, unconditional. That is the true inheritance that actually matters, not paper dollars sitting in a bank account, but the bone-deep, unshakable certainty that I am entirely worthy of being loved well. I learned that priceless lesson from a hero who has been gone for 14 years, and I proudly carry it with me every single day. That is my story. If you are currently trapped in a toxic relationship where you feel constantly diminished, casually dismissed, or manipulated into believing you are not enough, I want you to know one vital thing. You have the absolute right to set heavy boundaries. You have the power to walk away, and you do not need anyone's permission to fiercely love yourself. If this journey resonated with your heart, please leave a comment down below. I promise I read every single one. Subscribe and hit that bell icon if you want to hear more stories just like this. Check the description for similar videos. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. I will see you in the next one.